When most people are caught in a harmful act, there is a standard social expectation: guilt, a brief moment of defensiveness, and eventually an apology. But an anomaly exists. When confronted, some individuals never apologize. Instead, they violently flip the narrative 180 degrees, denying facts and blaming the accuser. This systemic flipping of reality is a profound psychological panic response. It is the defensive reaction of an identity that feels fundamentally threatened. To understand why this happens, we have to look back to the 1950s and the work of Carl Rogers. He was a leading figure in humanistic psychology, a movement often called the third force. Rogers offered an optimistic framework for human behavior, contrasting it against the darker, deterministic views of Freud's psychoanalysis and the mechanical focus of Skinner's behaviorism. Rogers proposed that our self is actually an architecture of three distinct components. Self-worth is the value we place on ourselves, while self-image represents the traits and behaviors we currently believe we possess. Together, these form our baseline identity. Above these sits the ideal self. This is the aspirational, flawless version of who we strive to become, the vision of who I want to be. Understanding how these three parts interact is necessary to explain why some minds violently reject the truth when confronted with their own bad behavior. In a healthy state of congruence, a person's real-world actions lock smoothly into their self-image. What they do matches who they believe they are. This stability shatters when a person commits an act that contradicts their deeply held ideal self. The presence of an abusive or damaging action creates a structural break in the psyche. Rogers called this incongruence. It is a state of unbearable psychological tension where our reality and our self-concept no longer fit together. To resolve this conflict, the mind faces a choice. It can either change the behavior to match the self-image, or it can attempt to rewrite reality to protect that self-image. When unable to change behavior, the mind triggers extreme defense mechanisms to rewrite the history of the event, ensuring the ego does not collapse. This internal breakdown creates a specific external fallout. Psychologist Jennifer Freud identified this pattern as DARVO, behaviors used to protect an incongruent ego from social accountability. It begins with denial. The abuser outright rejects the instance happened or argues that the behavior wasn't actually harmful, instantly shielding their self-image. Then comes the attack. The abuser shifts to the offense, targeting the credibility and character of the person holding them accountable to neutralize the threat. Finally, they reverse victim and offender. The abuser assumes the role of the falsely accused, turning the true victim into the alleged offender. This creates the trail blindness in victims and paralyzes onlookers into a state of neutral confusion. If reality is flipped successfully, the abuser keeps their reputation intact while the victim is silenced. We see a modern variation of this when abusers feign contrition by claiming a sickness or seeking treatment. It is a distraction strategy designed to diminish accountability by reframing conscious choices as involuntary symptoms. DARVO is a calculated strategy designed to keep an incongruent mind from having to face a reality it cannot psychologically afford to accept. So, how does society bypass these reality distortion fields? How do we foster the psychological safety required for a person to actually take responsibility? Carl Rogers identified three conditions necessary for a person to face their reality: empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. By providing unconditional positive regard, separating a person's fundamental value from their specific bad actions, we lower the ego's need to defend itself. Only when the threat of total identity destruction is removed can a mind safely drop its defenses and realign with reality. We cannot force another person out of a DARVO cycle if their entire identity depends on that defense mechanism. However, by understanding the mechanics of incongruence, an abuser's tactics are exposed. They are no longer confusing truths, but predictable panic responses. True psychological strength isn't found in protecting a flawless ideal self, but in the courage to live honestly as the real self.